IoT Unplugged, where we talk to industry leaders, innovators, and major players in the Internet of Things, bringing you the best and latest insights. Tune in to learn more. In this episode, I'm joined by Matt Maupin, Senior Product Manager at Silicon Labs, as he talks to me in the wake of conducting experiments into Matter-compliant devices and ecosystems from the consumer perspective. Hi Matt, thanks for joining me today on IoT Unplugged. Could you start us off by introducing yourself and sharing what you do at Silicon Labs?
Absolutely. Great. Thank you for having me. So my name is Matt Maupin. I'm a marketing manager here at Silicon Labs. I've actually been in the semiconductor industry for quite a while, and my focus for a long time has been on wireless, specifically enabling the smart home. And right now, I've had various jobs from project management to product management. I run a marketing team that's really responsible for wireless technologies in the home. So how do you enable these for our customers, make sure they have everything need to do their development to get products out to the market?
And wireless technologies is going to be a big focus of our conversation today because, recently you were conducting experiments investigating what matters like from the consumer perspective, which I think is absolutely fascinating because I think when we talk about matter, it's often looking at the manufacturer's perspective or, the devices themselves. So what inspired you to conduct these experiments in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I talked about, I've been doing wireless for a while, and it's really ingrained in me, both in my professional environment, but also in my home environment. I've got a fully enabled smart home that I've been doing. And one of the things that I was really interested in Matter was it was addressing, at least on paper, all the things that I had experienced with my journey into the smart home. So, I had that personal interest. Is this really addressing the issues, et cetera? But I think more than that, what really kicked it off was at Silicon Labs, we realized that, it's more than just compliance to the spec. It's how does this really work for the user? So in our Boston office, we have what we call a connectivity lab. And in there, we have different Matter devices from different vendors. We test from a user perspective. What's the user's perspective on this? And also we bring in our own development hardware with our sample apps to make sure everything works well. Well, I'm actually in Austin, not Boston. So I really wanted to get involved with this. So I sort of created my own connectivity lab at home. So I went and bought a lot of Matter devices, brought them into my existing network and tested them. And that's really sort of the inspiration for this is I really wanted to see how this user experience was and was Matter really addressing what they said they were going to do.
There was a phrase you said, which I thought was really interesting, which was it's addressing it on paper. Do you see other companies conducting these kind of experiments, doing this kind of investigation for themselves when it comes to what Matter says it's doing?
Yeah, maybe to an extent, we definitely see some of this within the CSA organization. But, we definitely, from our standpoint, we have a lot of interest from our customers. So the fact that our customers, which are the companies that are making these products, are so interested in what we're doing, leads me to believe they're probably not doing it on the scale that needs to be done.
Okay, and then moving on to the experiments themselves, how did you find them? What were your results?
Now, that was really the bulk of what I worked on. And, to give you some background, I did testing over about 3 months with three different ecosystems. I tested specifically against Google, I tested against Apple, and I tested against Amazon. And so, during my testing, I sort of grouped things into three areas, what I call the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, during my testing, a lot of this was from my perspective. So, I was looking at things that I wanted to be fixed. So, keep that in mind when I'm doing this. Somebody else's experience may vary because they're looking for different things. But, if we look at it at a high level, the good, there were several things I was looking for this to solve. One of it was to get to a single ecosystem. So if you looked at what I had in my home, I had over 100 connected devices. Most of them are lighting, but I have switches, security systems, etc. I had multiple different hubs in there and probably over 10 apps. So I was really trying to get to more of a single app, single ecosystem. And I think that's one of the good things that I saw overall. It wasn't complete, but for the most part, when I did all my testing, I tested from a single ecosystem. So if I tested from Google, I used the Google Home app. If I tested from Amazon, I did the Alexa app. And overall, that was a good experience. I think the thing that I was most impressed with, though, was the commissioning. And so, a lot of my devices in my home were Zigbee or Z-Wave, which had pretty good commissioning experiences. They've been around for a while, they've developed them. I hated Wi-Fi. I put Wi-Fi on my house and I pulled it out. Um, it was hard to commission. You had to take your phone, you had to change it to the SSID of the Wi-Fi device. You had to push keys over or type in keys, which in my case, from my access point, are very long and convoluted. Um, the Wi-Fi commissioning, while just using my phone and doing a QR code, was excellent. It was seamless. It worked. It did all the commissioning exchanges, all the security passwords, and worked great. So I think that was probably what was best for me, because that was a barrier of entry for me to use Wi-Fi devices. I just didn't like them. That barrier is, in my opinion, with Matter, resolved.
Okay, and then how would you characterize the bad?
Yeah, so the bad, again, this was sort of based on what I was looking for in my experience. There were several things here, I think. For me, I wanted a consistent experience across the ecosystem, not different vendors, but across the ecosystem. So one of the things I didn't like is, you know, I was testing, for example, let's use Google. I used an iPhone and an Android device to commission devices on the network. That actual flow and user experience was slightly different. And for me, it brought in questions. For example, as I'm going through, I do a QR code and then it would prompt me on one thing on an iPhone. It might skip that and go to a different prompt on an Android device. So I'm thinking to myself, is there a problem? Is something wrong, etc. So I really, I wanted to see the same experience through the ecosystem, regardless of the device that I was using. That was one of the things I wasn't real happy with. Um, the other thing, and this is going to be, you know, I think they'll improve on this, but you're still limited on what you could do based on the ecosystem or the app. So one of the big issues I had today, or in my existing network, I use a lot of Zigbee devices. They're specifically from Philips Hughes. I love their devices. They're very stable, but some of the advanced features they had, I had to use their app for versus using an Alexa skill. I have Amazon in my house. And that still isn't resolved with Matter. And I think that needs to get there, because I don't want to pull up a specific app to get a specific function. I'm hoping they'll get there eventually. Who knows? That may be a differentiation that these different vendors try to keep, but that's one of the things I didn't like as well. And then I think the other thing is, and I don't have an example to show, but when I bought these Matter devices, they still had a lot of works with logos, works with Amazon, works with Google, works with Apple. And I'm really hoping Matter gets away with that, because that is confusing for consumers, that they have to sit there and look at the box. Will it work in my ecosystem? If your ecosystem supports Matter and it's a Matter device, it should work. That's all I should be looking at. So I wasn't real impressed that I still had to look at the devices. And there were some devices that did not work on other ecosystems. A switch, for example, a switch worked only in the Apple ecosystem. It did not work in Amazon or Google.
And how about finally the ugly?
Yeah, so I gave one example there when I was talking about device support. The fact that I could buy a Matter-enabled device and it wouldn't work on my Matter ecosystem was irritating. The biggest one I saw at the time was the switch. So in Apple, the switch worked. I was able to do routines, control lights. With Google, it commissioned the device, but then there was no support for it. So I couldn't do anything with the switch. It just sat there. And with Amazon, I actually, at least on Amazon, I got an error message saying this device is not supported yet. But again, the fact that I'm buying a Matter device, I have a Matter network, and it didn't work, I really wasn't happy with. Also, at the time, this testing's 8 to 10 months old now. I had stability issues, especially with Matter over Thread. As I added more and more devices, I would have problems where devices would drop off the network. Thread requires what's called an open thread border router. That functionality is built into a lot of these ecosystems. So, for example, Apple and Amazon and Google have that support built in, but I had some stability issues on that. In fact, on some of them, I actually had to reboot my open thread border router. I would lose all devices. I will note that I have done some additional testing recently, at least with Apple. I've just started again, and a lot of those issues have been resolved. Some of the devices I've used, especially around lighting, offered firmware updates, and they have seemed to resolve those issues I was having. So that's a good thing. But that was definitely bad with the stability issues I had. And again, this testing was done in December 2023, actually November 2023 till about January 2024. And the other thing that I didn't really like is, yeah, I talked about the upgrades and how they support it, but I had to use the vendor app specifically to do that, and it wasn't automatic. So it's not like my Matter network automatically updated. I had to go into the vendor app and then do those updates. So it really wasn't seamless. So I think that's the other thing they need to get to, because users aren't going to think to go into an app and check for updates. It just needs to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to touch on this point of users aren't going to go into an app and update it, because you've just illustrated for us the time and the work you've put into conducting these experiments. In your opinion, will the average user put that much work into setting up an ecosystem? Do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, honestly, the average user absolutely not. Again, I'll go back to my Philips Hue network. That network has been around for a long time. They have a dedicated hub, but it just works. I bring devices on, they're on the network. They get updated if they need to with firmware updates. It lets me know if I ever go in the app, it'll tell me, hey, something's updated, but there's nothing I have to do on my end. It just works. And that's really where we need to get to the point that Matter just works for that end user, because the more interaction they have to do to get it to work, the bigger deal it's going to be. I mean, even on our phones, we may say, yeah, do the update, but we don't. I don't sit there and go and search, hey, is there an update available? Is there an update available? It just does it. And Matter really needs to get to the same area, and I don't think it's quite there yet from what I've seen.
Just out of interest, do you think you will retest ecosystems in the future to see whether things have changed?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually one thing I'm doing now. I've moved that testing now to my office versus at my home. And I've started with Apple. Like I said, the issues I originally saw, both with Wi-Fi and Matter on the Apple network, seemed to be resolved. Now, my network at home was very big. As I mentioned, I had over 100 devices already existing, and I brought in about 30 new Matter devices. A lot of them were lights, but I brought in sensors. But I had a lot going on in my home. In the office, obviously we have Wi-Fi, but I don't think I have near the network traffic probably that I had at my house at the time. So we'll have to see. But I am doing that. I am doing that testing now already.
And I suspect the average person isn't probably going to have that kind of scale and number of devices on their network, so that might help them in that there won't be as much traffic.
Yeah, I mean, 30 is not that many when you talk about lights, but yeah, you're probably correct early on. I definitely, as I scaled up though, I did see some issues. But again, here in my office, right now, I've got 11 lights on the Matter network, and they're working good. I don't have any issues with devices not responding, and my popcorning effect is really much better. And what I mean by that is when I turn something on, early on, I would have in one of my bathrooms, I had 8 lights, and you could actually see the lights. They may delay a second between coming on and off. Now everything's pretty seamless, working pretty well for me right now.
That's great. I want to touch on something you alluded to earlier, where you were talking about what you were looking for, and this reference to people might be looking for different things. If possible, could you provide a summary of the kind of things that the average person would be looking for if they're setting up a smart device, or I should say, if they're setting up a smart ecosystem in their home?
Yeah, so I think if I'll start sort of at what I'm going to call the initial purchasing journey. So, obviously one of the things you want to do is you want to go and you want to buy a device and you just want it to work. I think there's a good example that I've referenced is, and I experienced this when I first wanted to get a connected or smart lock. I went into a local home improvement store in the United States, and they had all these different smart locks, and they were based on technology from Zigbee to Z-Wave to Bluetooth to Wi-Fi. And in fact, I was looking for a specific vendor, and that vendor actually had Zigbee, Z-Wave, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth locks on the shelf, the exact same model with only the wireless technology. So, from the first thing, we need to get past this user confusion when they go to buy a device. I just want to go buy a device and I just want it to bring it home and work. And then I think the other thing is they just want it to work seamlessly. They want to bring it in, they want it to easily come up to their network, and they want to easily control it. I think Matter's done a good job with that with their commissioning. That worked across the board with every device I bought. The commissioning experience was really good. And then of course I think the other thing, for me, and I imagine a lot of users, if you're at home, you want it to work through your ecosystem of choice for voice control. I don't ever open an app at home. I don't want to open an app at home. When I'm at home, I want to control everything with my voice. And I believe that's probably where a lot of other users will do. I don't want to have to, it's, what's the advantage of having a switch on the wall or having to open an app? I want to just say, turn off the lights. And I think that's the other thing that, users are going to be looking for is this seamless control through their ecosystem or their digital voice assistant of choice. I think those are the big ones. And then just from there, it's hands off. They don't want to have to go and check these and do updates. They just want it to work.
So, based on everything we've spoken about, and based on the experiments that you've done, what are some actionable insights that both device manufacturers and developers can take to improve the whole experience?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. One is obviously they really need to look at it from a user experience. If you look at what Matter does, Matter has a lot of certification requirements or to ensure sort of interoperability. But that interoperability is from the device and the spec level. So, does a on command look like an on command supposed to, et cetera. I think they need to go beyond that and actually look at the whole user experience. And for, device manufacturers, they need to look at it across ecosystems. Maybe, if they just play in one region, maybe they just look at the popular ecosystems in their region. But if they're global, you know, do I work with all these popular ecosystems that support Matter? And that's going to get a little complicated because there's already so many of them. In fact, that's another beauty of Matter is the fact that, from day one, we had all this ecosystem support through firmware upgrades. So, for example, I've talked about Google, I've talked about Apple, I've talked about Amazon, you've got Samsung Smart Things. We're seeing Matter support in Asia through companies like Tuya. So that was one of the beauties of Matter is you didn't have this chicken and egg where you had to go and buy this device and you had to buy this supported hub, usually from the same company. The fact that Matter is, if you have one of these devices in your home, you already have a Matter infrastructure in your home and you could start buying Matter devices. But, again, the manufacturers need to actually test across these ecosystems to make sure everything's working. And more importantly, I think the ecosystems need to step up and make sure that they're supporting all these various device types. Again, as a user, I don't want to go buy a Matter-enabled device, bring it home, and not work. The CSA group has done an excellent job on supporting device types. There is, the number of devices, different devices that are supported in Matter is really good. In fact, if I look at technologies like Zigbee or Z-Wave, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth, it took them years and years and years to get to this level that Matter has today. But I'm not seeing the ecosystem supporting all these device types. So again, I have to look at the box and see, is it going to work on my Matter network from Amazon, which is not a good experience. So that's one of the things I think manufacturers and ecosystems need to do is just basically fill all those gaps in for a seamless experience for the user.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to mention to those who are listening while we're here?
Yeah, I think in general, I mean, obviously, I had some issues with Matter. I'm definitely still pro Matter. I think it's going in the right direction. If you look at what they've been able to accomplish in 2 years, is really amazing. I mean, I go back and remember my early Zigbee days, and it was not good. I'm 10 years in plus into Zigbee now. So, overall, I think Matter's got a lot of potential. What's great about it is it supports things like Matter over Wi-Fi that give you that high bandwidth requirements, whether it be cameras or whether it be a UI to an appliance. You also have Matter over Thread, which really provides that low power to your sensors that are going to run on those coin cell batteries. That's one thing that was missing in these different technologies. Zigbee was great at low data rates, low power, didn't have the bandwidth. Wi-Fi is very good at high bandwidth, but you're not going to use it on sensors that run on coin cells. The fact that Matter supports these different technologies that really provide the gamut, I think it's in a good place. And then, of course, there is going to be growing pains for everybody there right now. Like I said, we're two years in, so whether you're a user or a developer, if you're a developer, be prepared to do a lot of testing. Be prepared to support firmware updates to fix any issues you see. Etc. But overall, I think it's going well. The fact that issues I saw late last year, early this year, have been resolved, specifically around me for the lighting, is very encouraging. That means they're seeing these things and they are fixing them and being proactive about it.
Which is probably the main thing to focus on, because there will probably always hiccups with new technologies, and especially when we talk about getting devices made by different brands capable of speaking to one another in a seamless way.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I saw these on all our technologies. I saw them in Wi-Fi, I saw them in Bluetooth, I saw them in Zigbee. It's always been there. A lot of us just think Bluetooth just works today for the most part. If you really go back when Bluetooth was originally implemented, you had all these little profile icons where, yeah, this supported audio, or this supported the serial port profile, or this supported something else. So even all these technologies had this growing pains. They've had a long time to resolve it. I think Matter's doing a very good job of resolving these very quickly.
Well, thank you for being here, Matt. It was really great to chat to you and learn a little bit more about your experiments.
Oh, great. Appreciate the time. I love talking about this. I believe in it and I love home automation, so this is exciting.
IoT Unplugged.